Battersea and thinking about the site and the urban regeneration that's going on, I had to kind of experience it myself, and I had to spend as much time as I could there. So that was really great. And what was particularly nice as well, or interesting for me, was that it's such a constantly mutating and evolving space because of the construction and this pace at which the construction is happening. There's so many developments that are happening all along the river, from Nine Elms all the way along, including a big construction with the Royal College of Art just across from Rugby IIT. So there's so much change happening at any one time. So it was just quite interesting to be able to go back, and every time there would be something new. And then with the Dazzle Club, through doing all of this walking, through doing all this groundwork, it felt like it was a really interesting outlet to think about Battersea and to think about the space. We actually lead a walk through Battersea and in and around Battersea and showcase the construction, but also this quite visible divide between some like old parts of Battersea, the very affluent parts of Battersea, such as St Thomas's, where the Royal Children go to school, and some of these very deprived council estates that have incredibly high crime rates and are set to be demolished. There's a very visible divide in Battersea, perhaps more than anywhere else I've seen personally in London. And then with the Dazzle Club, they are a really interesting anti-surveillance collective, and what they do is currently they're inviting artists to lead walks in different areas of the UK, but they use this technique called dazzle paint, where they paint, it's like a form of reverse contouring. So they'll paint the face with face paint, kind of in the reverse of the way that a normal face would be. So I guess the areas that are darker, like the eye sockets, you'd paint lighter, and it's a way of preventing facial recognition from recognizing the face. So that was really interesting. And I'm close friends with Emily Roderick, who is part of that collective. There are 4 artists in that collective. And so yeah, it just came about really organically, and it seemed like a nice invitation to kind of work with them and to explore Battersea, and also consider surveillance within Battersea, which is particularly prominent around the power station, because the development is investing so heavily in advanced technologies of facial recognition. Apple are moving their headquarters there, so there's a lot of really interesting things specifically to surveillance as well that tie into Battersea.
Can you talk a bit about your publication NIMBY and how you came across the work of Loretta Lees?
With the publication, this opportunity and spending so much time in Battersea, it felt like a really prime time to produce what is essentially my first artist book. Of spending so much time there, it seemed like the perfect kind of outlet or vehicle to translate some of these thoughts and ideas. And then one thing that became more prominent through the book, and that fed into the window as well, was thinking about the power station, but also how the power station is sort of packaged and marketed, and the language that is used to kind of commodify and sell these units, and the way they sort of tap into the history of Battersea, and like there's certain kind of buzzwords that they use that really interested me, and also the way in which that they kind of avoid certain things. So gentrification as a word is like has such negative connotations, they would never ever use it, but there's a kind of a lot of repetition of the words of like renewal and redevelopment and regenerate, these kind of, I guess, rousing words that have certain associations with people that can create a sense of excitement or buzz. So that kind of really interested me, and then I was honing in a lot, or thinking a lot about gentrification and the potential problems that a development such as the power station would have in terms of further gentrifying the area and displacing smaller businesses and kind of neighboring communities. And it was through that I found out about Loretta Lees. I kind of stumbled upon what was essentially an anti-gentrification handbook called Staying Put, that she had published with residents from the Haygate estate in Elephant Castle, but also in collaboration with artist collective Snag, the Southwark Notes archive group. So that was kind of where I first came across Loretta's work. But she's incredibly well recognized and well published around issues of displacement and gentrification. And so it seemed like the perfect opportunity to kind of approach her and try and have an interview. So that interview is, an incredible kind of insight into kind of her mind, her thinking about Battersea, but also thinking about housing more broadly across the whole of London, and also the implications that the pandemic and COVID-19 will have on housing, and the potential for people to kind of, the potential people leaving London, I guess.
How did this collection of research influence your project, NIMBY, with contemporary collaborations?
Well, I think the certainly the language fed into the work quite directly. I mean, I was really interested in how this transfer technique could be applied to the materials itself. So, because the plasterboard already comes kind of with this date or this date of manufacture, and so I quite liked the way I could kind of play with that and probe that in a way. And so some of these words that are featured in the publication, kind of buzzwords like energy efficient, or we talked about regeneration or renewal, these words are kind of banded across some of the structures or the precarious sculptures that I've made that are kind of these sort of broken sheets of plasterboard. And then also as well, the publication kind of gave rise to what essentially is a series of photographs that are very rooted in now, because they are kind of half-built constructions of, like Frank Gehry's kind of huge vanity project of apartments that are just behind the power station. The documents are very much rooted in now because it's half-built. So that was interesting too. And the photographs then also fed into the plasterboard. So I applied the same technique and was able to kind of transfer whole images onto the face of the plasterboard, which then kind of again littered the space, but also functioned as a kind of temporary plinth-like structure for the money box itself inside the antique shop.
How did you find working within the confines of the window space? Were there any aspects of the context of the window that fed into your thinking about your installation?
Yeah, I think the window display is a really interesting kind of mechanism. It's not something that I've particularly used to doing. And I think as a sculptor, I tend to think very three-dimensionally, obviously making sculpture that can be viewed from all angles. And as I'm making it from all angles. So I'm very conscious of how it is depicted in from any side really. So kind of the challenge of the window display in many ways is that it's one viewpoint, that of the kind of passerby. And I think also the nature of what I chose to do, which was a kind of installation of these precarious structures that are all balanced on each other, could have only really existed in real time. So rather than kind of finishing a project, a product, an object, an artwork in the studio and taking it to a gallery space, it was more a case of actually really responding to the constraints of the window in real time. And a kind of nice challenge of that too was also having people pass by and engage and interact with the work, particularly whilst it was still being made, or still kind of being finished, because I think that's a very vulnerable position. You normally close the door to the studio and that's you, and you're in your bubble and you're kind of making things, and you kind of keep the world out until this is a kind of finished thing that you then showcase. And it's like, here, look at this thing that can kind of stand on its own. But it was actually really nice to be able to get kind of chat to people throughout that process and kind of just engage on a very sort of human basis, as it was still being made, which I really liked.
Great. Well, thanks for your generous answers, Josh. And to our audience, if you have any questions for Josh or myself, please DM us at Contemporary Collaborations and we'll get back to you. Thanks again to Josh for all the work you've done with NIMBY, for NIMBY. That's from me and also the Robert Young Antique team. And thanks for watching.
Great, thank you. It's been such a pleasure to be involved with this project.